that what we're really talking about is the relationship between content, capacity, culture, and context, right? And all of these pieces fit together in different ways, and we play different roles within them. So one of the core questions that I keep asking is, what is a knowledge mobilization culture, right? And what are all of the aspects of that culture? And the culture in health of knowledge mobilization is very different than the culture in business. And within businesses, they're very different as well, right? I was recently in Palo Alto. I interviewed a series of tech companies, including Google. Their turnaround on research is days. They don't wait weeks or years. It's days. And part of their culture is that their employees have 20% of their time that are completely at their own disposal. So all those neat apps that come out of Google, like Google Maps, that was an individual working on their own that said, what if I mash together these concepts? And then Google took an interest in it, they plowed money into it, it became an app, and it's actually part of their process. So the culture is very different. The culture where I worked in child and youth mental health is different again. And I think that's, understanding those differences, making them as explicit as possible, understanding that the changes happen very slowly, and that sometimes the reward systems that you need in place for people to feel that they're valued have to be adjusted.
And it's important to realize that the culture, this is not new to universities.
No.
It's new to as an institutional capacity. So Nicole, how long, you got your KISS grant in 2006. But when did you start doing this?
Probably 2000.
2000. Deborah Pepler at York University is in psychology. She runs PrevNet, the Promoting Relationships and Eliminating Violence Network. She's a scholar. She graduates her students, writes her papers, but she sits on the Ontario Safe Schools Action Team. She sits on UN bodies. She goes in and talks to schools and to boards. So she's been doing this. So it's not new. It happens, but it's happened within projects, and it's happened within programs. It hasn't been supported at an institution like we're doing that. So while we think this is new, in fact, it's been happening a lot. So the culture change, what we need to do to help, because there needs to be a culture change, is to recognize that actually the culture's there. We need to recognize it and celebrate that, but also support the traditional scholarship, which also needs to go on. It needs to go on hand in hand.
I think that there's a challenge, and I think what David just said about this not being new, it's not, right? So if you look at certain areas where the imperative is, the imperative for immediate knowledge is there. The military is so advanced on this, but they have tons of money, right? Chevron, the oil company, spent $900 million building their knowledge management system. It took them 7 years. They failed in their first 4 attempts, and the APQC accredits it now with saving them $1 billion a year in lost time, right, of people looking for things. And so, there's examples. There's no way where we're going to scale that to the social sciences and humanities, right? When was the last time there was an extra $900 million for one institution to build a system for them? And so, part of the challenge is that it's going to occur partly piecemeal. There's going to be models and examples that are developed that can then be implemented and adapted to other contexts. And I think that's actually what's emerging. This is where what I see is happening as a trend. More and more institutions are becoming interested in what this means because they see there's value being created. So the slide that's just before that one, stop there. Okay. The slide just before that one, what people are seeing is that there's all of these kind of value determinations, and there's a whole list of other things that can come out. They can be more efficient in the development of those, more efficient from a government point of view in the development of appropriate programs, of the policies that are accompanying them, of developing appropriate people skills, of enhancing practice in whatever it is that you're practicing. I mean, that was actually one of the core aspects in dealing with the superintendents of education, is how do we improve the practice of teachers, of vice principals and principals, of superintendents, so that they're more responsive to their communities, to the needs of the emerging marketplaces, and that they can adapt their curriculums to the specific context in which they're living, right? Because Sault Ste. Marie and downtown Toronto are not the same community, except that they fall under the same policies of the province. So I think that's part of the culture piece, right? Of recognizing that we can actually do our business differently.
In the first year of KISS grants, there is a grant awarded to a woman at McGill. Do you remember her name? She's describes herself as an applied historian, and she got money to work on the cultural identity of Montreal, and her partner was a local archive and a local museum. And so it was taking the history expertise that existed within her unit, and I think it's McGill, it's one of the Montreal universities, and connecting that with the public cultural institutions to co-create messages around visual identities of historical Montreal for the public. So it was not creating, it was not new historical research, but they knew what existed, they knew what was there. It was the partnership that is almost a packaging of that knowledge to create a new opportunity for Montreal citizens. And so there was an example. I haven't done anything directly with the history department, but we have Paul Lovejoy, who works in the African diaspora. And he's had a CFI grant, he's just got an MCRI, and a big part of his work is connecting what we learn from the African diaspora to his receptors are mainly schools. Okay, so he's connecting, he's doing a lot of work between Canada and the Caribbean, and looking at engaging the local African-Canadian community around York, and then connecting what we learn about those experiences to school curricula. So not so much applied history, but it's within the history department, and very much mobilizing that knowledge.
I think, another example related to history is the whole movement towards the digital humanities. Right? That there's an example around that question of access. Right? So I'll give you this is a very grounded, practical example that came out of a conversation with my father. I had a conversation with the Library and Archives Canada about digitization of the recruitment records of all the World War I veterans, right? Because they were disappearing. Who were these people? My grandfather was a World War I veteran. My father found out about this project, phoned me and said, could we find it? My grandfather was an illiterate laborer. And I went online, found the document had been digitized, and there was his signature, which was an X, and it was witnessed by somebody else. But then we had this whole conversation about, what would it have been like to be a young man, illiterate. Somebody tells you what's going to happen, you put an X on a piece of paper, and off you go, right? I mean, there's an example. I mean, it's a personal example, but the example around access, right, and of providing easy searchable databases to these documents that, unless you could go to Ottawa, into the archives, go through these pages and pages and pages to find, you wouldn't be able to access and then not understand part of your own story. So,
yeah.
There is so much value in universities that it's just unrealized. There's so much that we've produced. I mean, if we think about how the university system has changed in just the last 50 years, there's so much that we've produced that just doesn't get to the places that it needs to be. And so, partly because we just don't know how to do it, and partly because we don't have the relationships. And part of what's happening now is that it's emerging. I mean, I just brought this up as an example of, this is just a reflection. This is just, I pulled out some contracts, but this is just a reflection of our society, right? Like, it doesn't matter what you're dealing with. People are hungry for it, right? There's, as a researcher, if you sat down and said, what would be 10 places where what I do and my colleagues do would be useful to them, I bet you could, right? The question is developing that set of relationships.